play it back later. And I'm going to pass it on to Michelle Yancey, the Chief Executive Officer of Good Shepherd Services.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay, thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you. And want to especially thank my colleague Diana for pulling together this absolutely exceptional group of panelists. Very excited about this conversation. So pleased to have you with us and all of the folks who are here with us to listen to this important conversation. As Diana said, my name is Michelle Yancey, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of Good Shepherd Services. This conversation that we're hosting today is a really important one for us because in 2018, we committed to becoming an anti-racist organization, and we've been on that journey since then. And now we're looking beyond even that goal to try to learn about what it would mean to be a pro-Black institution. And so to that end, we're especially grateful for this conversation today, for all you'll share, and for all that we have the opportunity to learn. This is also especially imperative to me as a white leader at the forefront of an organization that provides services to and partners with communities who are over 95% Black and Latino, and whose staff is also a majority of people of color. As I said, we've been on this journey at Good Shepherd Services and are really committed to advancing our racial and social justice agenda. It was during our strategic planning process back at prior to 2018, our former strategic plan, where we really made this explicit commitment to becoming a multicultural and anti-racist organization. And from that came a lot of work that has really borne incredible fruits and has brought us to where we are today. And really, as I said, still on the journey, very much so. Some of the highlights of our accomplishments so far were creating our Leadership, Equity, Accountability, and Diversity Council, which really helped to guide us into what became a very full chapter of work, led to the creation of Diana's position, who is our Chief Anti-Racism and Equity Officer and leads a team of folks who help to lead this work at Good Shepherd Services. And just as an example of some of the fruits so far, back in 2016, our executive team was 90% white and only 10% Black, and also all female. In 2023, it is now 64% people of color and 36% white. Of course, I am also still white. We also saw shifts in our senior leadership group. In 2016, it was 53% white, 46% people of color. In 2023, it is 28% white and 63% people of color. Our executive team has also diversified in terms of gender as well, gender identity. In 2020, we introduced a lot of trainings to help support the development of everyone throughout the organization, especially our leaders, to truly understand and develop anti-racism and equity skills and use best practices to really help create a GSS-specific anti-racist and equity framework that helps guide us in our work. We launched an Anti-Racism and Equity Institute, which Diana has led, both externally and internally here at Good Shepherd Services. For the external one, we welcomed 22 nonprofit leaders from across New York City social services sector. And then I feel like I'm going to go way over. There's so much more to share, but I will leave that for another day. And just want to suffice to say that we are, as I said, we're still on the journey. We have so much to learn. I'm happy to share with anyone who might be interested. Diana or I or anyone here at Good Shepherd would be happy to talk to you about our journey, some of our learnings, the work that we've done, and the work that we're still doing. And most of all, just want to turn it all over to you to hear from the expertise and wisdom in the room and help us and to be inspired and to start actually mapping out what will be the next phase of our journey. So I'll turn it back over to you, Diana.
Thank you, Michelle. And I'm going to turn it back over to this wonderful group of panelists, but Dax in particular, who's going to moderate the conversation for us today. Dax is a colleague, a friend, and I deeply admire his work and loved collaborating on this partnership with you, Dax. So Dax, I'm passing it to you. You're on mute, the age-old.
I'm off mute. Thank you so much, Diana, for introducing this space to all of this community that you hold and that you nurture through your work, just allowing us to be part of it. I'm going to be introducing the folks, and we're going to get into the panel, and we're going to do all the things, and we'll really enjoy the time. I hope folks come just to be energized. I know there's a lot happening in our world and a lot of reasons to not feel energized. I hope you came here for some energy, because that's what we're going to bring. I just want to do a couple of thank yous at the beginning. I want to thank, of course, Good Shepherd for hosting this event, for Diana for having just the presence of mind, the courage, the vision to like enable this and to trust myself and the panelists that you're going to be introduced to, just to be part of this, to hold this space. Because that's not something everybody can do. Let's be very clear. Not everybody will, would say, here are the keys, drive. And that's what you've been enable us to do. I want to thank the panelists that you'll all meet in a moment. That's Cad, Trevor, Angela. I'm going to introduce you more formally shortly. I want to thank Nonprofit Quarterly. Not only want to just thank Cyndi Suarez, just as a person, as a human being, as an editor-in-chief of an incredibly important magazine that has just evolved and grown over the years, but I just want to celebrate this book, this new book. It's, it comes from the ideas from the winter 2022 issue of the magazine that all of us contributed to, that you'll be meeting, and it turned into a book. And this book came out just a few months ago, and if you haven't got a chance to read it, it's published by Wiley, and it's beautiful. It's great to hold. It's got brilliance all through the pages, and you'll hear some of it today. Finally, I want to just thank the audience. Thank you just for making time. I want to really hold that and honor that, because you could be doing a lot of things with your afternoon, with your lunch hour, with wherever you are in your day, and you're choosing to be here. And that's meaningful. It says something about you personally, but also about your own professional aspirations and desire to grow and to learn, and just how seriously you take our sector, our work. I think that's the key. How do we take ourselves seriously enough to make the time for our learning and our development of our expertise? That's the key. That's critical. I want to start with this one question for folks, and I'm going to get into it, but I'm a writer, so I have to do a little bit of my opening, but I'll jump into it. I want to just start with the question of, when you hear the word pro-Black, when you hear that word pro-Black, what comes to mind? What goes through your body? What does your spirit register? And you could just sit with that for yourself, for a moment. That's not something you need to share with anybody, but I want you to think about that question. And with that, and as you're thinking, I want to share something with you. So when I was invited to contribute to the Nonprofit Quarterly issue back in 2022, focused on building pro-Black sector, I was frankly a little bit caught off guard. I mean, in particular, I was doing DE&I work at the time, and the call to action specifically that was being, requested through the invitation was to think beyond that. And I got to be honest with you, felt challenged in a way, professionally challenged, personally challenged. What do you mean beyond this work that I'm doing? And first and foremost, the answer to answer that call, to think on this question of what does pro-Black mean for us and what it would look like for it to be fully embodied, I realized that it required me to get over my own resistance, my own hesitation to this notion that a pro-Black anything is somehow too narrow or is in some ways exclusionary. Because sometimes when it gets lifted up and named in that way, it becomes, oh, this is not inclusive of all folks, so therefore it can't be X, Y, and Z. But once I let the invitation settle in, I found myself energized by it. And I think it allowed me to go beyond the present moment I was in and toward these possible spaces, into what Cyndi likes to call an edge space. And what occurred to me was that when you think about it, whenever we as a country have focused on securing the rights of Black people, it has always resulted in benefits for other folks. And we're going to hear more about that today. I want y'all to just hold that and sit with that. You think about the Civil Rights Act of 1866. It was later enshrined as the 14th Amendment in 1868. It was explicitly passed to protect and propel recently emancipated Black slaves, enslaved Black people into the body politic, to make my ancestors true citizens in the eyes of the law. And while its promise initially went unfulfilled, those ancestors and their allies continued to hold out hope and organize and protest to enforce it. And now, today, that amendment, a law passed to protect Black life, has become the bulwark of the legal backlash against affirmative action in schools and more recently, diversity efforts in the workplace. In one sense, the efforts of Black people to make civil rights real and meaningful have enabled other marginalized groups to rely on that precedent in those efforts to pursue their own American dream, which is a beautiful thing because it shows how Black success translates into the success for other people as well. But in another, it illuminates the bitter and enduring irony that no good deed goes unpunished. The same can be said about civil rights legislation in the 1960s. Black folks were on the front lines of the struggle for civil rights, and in many instances dying to secure these rights. That legislation remains the basis upon which nearly every marginalized group is able to make a legal claim of right to participate equally in the workplace and our society more broadly. And the point I'm trying to make is that whenever we have sought to solve for the problems facing Black people, whenever we have been pro-Black, we have solved for the challenges facing so many other folks. Yet that is not the narrative. The narrative, the one I encounter again and again, suggests that focusing on Black people is too narrow and it excludes everyone else. And this fiction is yet another form of disinformation that is consistent with and implicitly supports and is reinforced by the legal backlash against DEI. The backlash suggests that the BIPOC folks and women who have been elevated into new roles are somehow less deserving because they are less qualified. And this is also the argument that I'm typically hearing whenever I do work with organizations, and it is a tired one. It's an argument that at its core seeks to preserve advantages that some have broadly accumulated as a result of structural biases across myriad institutions. So in essence, we are encountering a backlash that is being fueled by people who have benefited from discriminatory policies and practices and didn't have any problem with it then. Yet they are now using the recent Supreme Court decision to suggest that they have been unfairly disadvantaged, that they are the real victims. This is the constant paradox that we are all asked to accept as perfectly normal. We can know that the history of systemic racism is factual and still continues to color our reality, yet the moment we attempt to do something about it, we encounter resistance and disinformation. We can look at outcome data across many, if not all areas of life: infant mortality, educational attainment, interaction with the criminal justice system, wealth, homeownership, jobs, health, even lifespan, and all see striking differences by race. Yet we are asked to disbelieve all of that, to pretend that we see before our eyes is not real, that something else is at play and that something else is there's something fundamentally problematic about our character. And that dissonance, being asked to deny what is so evident, takes its toll on us all. It warps us, it corrupts us, it exhausts us. And that exhaustion naturally makes us want to revert back to what is familiar. The familiar offers consistency. It gives us a sense of calm and order, but it is not a solution. A pro-Black vision can help us make sense of that which doesn't make sense, that which we know to be untrue. Because the only way people could liberate themselves is by being able to hold a vision for themselves that they could not see and that defied the entire structure of thought that they faced. In a practical sense, adopting a pro-Black vision helps us expand and reimagine the notion of merit, to incorporate and elevate skills and attributes, the qualifications Black folks have been bringing to the table but have always been overlooked and undervalued for, that help our organizations function but are not compensated. It will help us expand our notion of merit. Finally, adopting a pro-Black vision helps us adopt a longer view of struggle and change and be in the discomfort of learning and unlearning without resorting to quick fixes. But how do you build those institutions in real time? And how do you move from theory to practice, from rhetoric to action, and from a focus on struggling against anti-Blackness to a struggling for pro-Blackness? So we have assembled an amazing group of practitioners and thinkers, people who are leading organizations, helping lead organizations, and designing the futures we believe we all need to thrive. The three panelists will introduce themselves more fully, and they're all going to have an opportunity to just explore their ideas before we dig into some deeper conversations. But I just want to do some quick introductions for them. Angela Romans Currently serves as the founding executive director of Innovation for Equity. It's a network of professionals focused on collaborating and innovating across the education ecosystem to improve life outcomes for Black learners and increase Black leadership in education. Cad Smith is the founder of 1226 Solutions, a firm focused on changing the day-to-day work experiences of people in the nonprofit, philanthropic, civic, and tech sectors. 1226 works with teams that aspire to treat their staff with dignity, that invest in holistic leadership, and those who want to challenge the norms of how organizations should operate. Oh, and he's also a 2L, a second-year law student at the University of San Francisco Law School. And finally, Trevor Smith. Trevor is a writer, researcher, and a strategist focused on topics such as racial inequality, wealth inequality, reparations, and narrative change. He is currently the co-architect of the BLIS Collective, that's BLIS Collective, a culture change tank building narrative power between and within Black and Indigenous communities. He is also the director of narrative change at Liberation Ventures, a field builder fueling the movement for Black-led racial repair, where he is building the, quote, reparations narrative lab. The RNL is the first of its kind creative space designed to build narrative power behind reparations. He's also the creator, curator, and editor of a newsletter titled Reparations Daily. So we have some amazing folks, and we're going to get the chance to hear from them. I have no particular order, but I'm going to open it up to Angela and just give you a moment to just welcome yourself to the space, share some opening thoughts, and then you can choose who you want to pass it to next. And we'll just allow y'all to hold the space for a minute before we get into the conversation. Go for it.
Thank you so much, Dax, for modeling that sharing power, right? Which is very much pro-Black. So thank you to Good Shepherd Services for bringing us together today in this conversation and creating the space for us to dream and collaborate. Thank you so much to the nonprofit Quarterly. Cyndi Suarez, much love to her for engaging many of us in these conversations for the past couple of years when she didn't have to, when it was risky for her to say, what does it mean, to ask the question, what does it mean to build pro-Black organizations and to build a whole edition of the nonprofit Quarterly and beyond on that question, that provocative, that provocation. So, so much love to Cyndi for your vision and leadership and power. And to introduce myself, I'm Angela Romans, as Dax said. I'm actually Angela Nikki Romans is my full government name. And my mother named me after Angela Davis and Nikki Giovanni. So I try every single day in some small way to live up to their very big legacy, which continues to grow and inspire, generations of folks. So first and foremost, to call their names into the space. And then I have been an educator all my adult life and say that I do that because when I was growing up, my mom showed up in the school all the time. It was like, oh no, where's mom again? And she showed up because she was saying, why is my daughter not getting X? Why is my son not in Y program? Why is the school doing Z? And it should be doing A, B, and C. And so she really showed up in a, constant, consistent way to fight for me and my brother to get the kind of education that she knew that we deserved. And so I do what I do every single day in this education space so that Black mamas like mine don't have to fight to get their children the kind of education that is their right, that they deserve. So I want to bring my mother into the space and really my why as well. And so Dax, your opening just, I have so many thoughts about everything that you said, but I will maybe just open to talk a little bit about my organization, Innovation for Equity, and what it does. And maybe that will just be a good introduction to sort of many of the things that I'm working on and thinking about right now. So Innovation for Equity was founded 5 years ago. Dax talked about us being a network of education change makers. And it was founded by 24 Black leaders who came together to really get to know each other first and foremost, across the kind of silos where people don't know each other in education. So it was superintendents and higher education presidents and not-for-profit leaders and philanthropists, and also education technology execs, venture capitalists, investors, folks who normally don't have anything to do with each other, or don't talk about supporting each other, talk about loving on each other, talking about really deeply getting to know each other. And they came together for those reasons, for a few particular reasons, to support each other, because many of them were the only in their spaces. And it's like, oh, that's happening to you too. That's happening to me too. You're not crazy, right? So really getting to know each other deeply and supporting each other in the work that they were leading. They came together to figure out, given each other's work, how they could collaborate, knowing that as people, we can be greater than the sum of our parts. If we know each other, if we connect deeply, if we figure out how to collaborate truly, authentically, and intentionally. And so they came together for that. And they also said, how can we make more of us? Because we don't want to get in these spaces and then pull up the ladder, right? We really actually want to make sure that we are building space for more of us, because what we know to be true is if you have more Black people who have more Black people who love Black people, first and foremost, and more Black people who have the decision-making power and resources to move things, that everything will get better. I guess to your point, Dax, about Black people thriving, being best for everybody. So they came together to connect and cultivate Black leaders, to build collective power, to advance these solutions that we're all working on, and all of that in service of Black learners thriving, and Black communities thriving. And so that's the work that I'm leading in partnership with an amazing group of people. And so, so much of that is really, to me, relevant to this question about, what does a pro-Black sector look like? First and foremost, to me, the question is why? Why are we even having the conversation? To your point, Dax. And I will end by saying that for us, it was about it's based largely on this whole notion that you were talking about of targeted universalism, right? So what do we want for everybody? We want everybody to thrive. We want justice for all. The all means all. But in order to do that, we have to make sure to center the folks who are the farthest from that vision. And in so many ways, it's Black people right now, and has been for years and years. And so in order for us to have all people thriving, Black people thrive. Or in order, as long as Black people are thriving, basically everybody's thriving. So that's the work we're working on in the education space. And so many thoughts to continue the conversation, but I will leave it there. Why pro-Black? Because when Black people are thriving, everybody's thriving. And then I will pass it on to Trevor.
Thanks so much, Angela, and really appreciate being in this space today. And yeah, thanks for the prompt, Dax. When I think about pro-Blackness, what does it mean to build a pro-Black organization? A couple of quotes come up for me, and then a couple of questions come up for me. So in terms of quotes, Robin D.G. Kelly said, the reason I focus on imagination is because we will need to imagine new social, economic, and political arrangements, new cultural practices, new ways of being together. That is one of the first quotes that comes up to me, because we have to imagine what a pro-Black world looks like, because we are not used to it. We have not been given it. It's if any, we are standing on a foundation that is anti-Black. So as Dax mentioned when he was introducing me, I'm the co-architect of a new organization called the Bliss Collective, and Bliss stands for Black Liberation, Indigenous Sovereignty. So we are not only thinking about what does it look like to build a pro-Black organization, but also a pro-Indigenous organization. And that means, how do we build an organization that's oriented toward decolonization? Because two of the founding myths, two of the biggest lies that the US is founded on is that this is newfound land, that it was land to be conquered, and that there was no one here. And that the other is that Black people were less than human. And it is these two lies, these two myths that have been built upon to create the structures of inequity that we see today. So to me, building a pro-Black organization must go back to the founding story of the United States and seek to rewrite it. That's one of the ways in which I think about pro-Blackness. And the other two quotes that come up for me come from my shero, Bell Hooks. She said, "Loving Blackness as political resistance transforms our ways of looking and being, and thus creates the conditions necessary for us to move against the forces of domination and death and reclaim Black life." I don't think, I think that might be one of my favorite quotes in the world. And so to me, when I think about pro-Blackness, what comes up for me is loving Blackness. What does it actually look like to love Blackness? And not in the way of, I have a Black friend or I have a Black partner, but going deeper than that, thinking about what it looks like culturally to love Blackness. And so organizations, obviously, whether they're nonprofit or for-profit organizations or government institutions, are part of a larger culture. So to me, loving Blackness is inherently tied to building pro-Black organizations, because it should be rooted in shifting culture. And I think that goes back to the first quote that I read from Robin D.G. Kelley. And so I think some of the questions that we have to ask ourselves are, what does a pro-Black world look like? And in a sub bullet of that question is, what does loving Blackness look like? And how can we organize around a framework of loving Blackness, both within kind of our broader culture and within our organizations? And then the last quote that comes to mind, again, is from Bell Hooks, where she articulates a little bit more about what love is. And she says, "Love is an act of will, namely both an intention and an action. Will also implies choice. We do not have to love, we choose to love." And so we would have to wake up every day in our organizations and choose to create institutions, to create organizations that are actively choosing to love Blackness, to actively choosing to love Black people in all of the complexity that is Blackness, not flattening it, but really understanding the depths of Blackness, which would mean understanding the histories, and not just the history in the United States, but Blackness as a globally understood concept. So it would really mean understanding how, the roots of colonialism and how colonialism was imported into what we now call the United States. So those are some of the things that come up for me. And then I think my mind also goes to the Mo Mitchell article that was written in The Forge earlier this year, also a partnership with Nonprofit Quarterly. I think it was republished there, where they talk about the different dimensions of resilient organizations. And he mentions that there are structural dimensions that we must consider, ideological dimensions that we must consider, strategic dimensions that we must consider, and emotional. And to me, of these, the one that I'll pull out is ideological. And so to me, a pro-Black organization must be committed or in favor of reparations. That doesn't mean that your organization necessarily needs to be working on reparations or be doing reparations advocacy. But to me, ideologically, you would have to agree that reparations are owed to Black people across the globe for the vestiges of slavery, and then in the United States for the vestiges of slavery, Jim Crow, and modern day structural racism that we see today. And so I think that's a starting point for me, ideologically, being aligned on or being in agreement that reparations is something that should be given to Black people in the United States, and thinking about it beyond the financial aspect, thinking about reparations from a cultural and a political aspect that seeks to transform our society at large. So those are some of the things that come up for me, and I'm sure we'll dig in a little bit deeper as the conversation continues. So I'll pass it to Kat.
Right on. Thank you, Trevor. Good afternoon to some of y'all. Good morning to those of y'all on the West Coast, aka the best coast. I didn't mean to do it, but I had to do it. I couldn't help myself. Yeah, my name is Cass Smith. I use he, him, his pronouns. I will also just start with gratitude, first and foremost, to everyone who decided to join us. As Dax alluded to earlier, there are so many ways you could be spending your time. I am certain of that. And you all decided to participate as listeners and also as folks who hopefully will have the chance to interact with some questions. So who can really engage us in the exciting and our rejuvenating nature of this conversation. Want to thank Good Shepherd Services as well. And then Nonprofit Quarterly. I have the utmost respect for Cyndi Suarez and her leadership and being not only a thought leader, but a connector of dots in terms of connecting folks who have ideas and are doing work in various communities across this country and even across the globe. And so when I think about pro-Blackness, I mean, I cannot help but start with the most personal kind of locus of what it means for me. I grew up raised by my grandmother, similar to Angela. I want to bring my grandmother's name into the room. Her name was Dorothy Marie Smith. And my grandmother was, before she was using the term, before I ever heard the term pro-Black, she personified what it means to be a pro-Black leader. So whether it was faith-based organizing or community organizing, she invested any bit of time she didn't have to give to her family or to give to her just ability to make ends meet into a Black community. I remember one time when I was growing my hair out, my grandmother handed me my first pick and it had a fist on the end of it. And I was like 6 years old, you know? And I was like, what's this about? She was like, this is about Black power. And she said, do you know what I mean by that? And I was 6 years old. No, I haven't. No idea what you mean by that. Tell me more. And she proceeded to kind of open up the autobiography of Malcolm X. And that was one of the first books that we read together. So I say all that in so much as the way in which I was raised was with a consciousness towards Black being beautiful, towards understanding the brilliance in which the Black experience can offer, not only to Black folks, but also, as Dax kind of alluded to everyone. When we commit ourselves to understanding the very particular and unique experience, I would say within the context, as Trevor said, of what's called the United States, but even across the diaspora, of trying to understand the resilience that is inherently been required for Black folks to survive and also thrive in any colonial project, there is something so profoundly exciting and reassuring that even in a world that feels extremely chaotic, that feels on the brink of destruction, that we have answers that we can find through history. I want to share a couple of quotes inspired by what Trevor just did and kind of thinking about how I contextualize what it means to be pro-Black in 2023. I am a huge proponent of everything that I've ever read by James Baldwin. So both quotes come from James Baldwin. The first one is, you think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read. And so when I think about pro-Blackness, it is around contextualizing the present in historical analysis. And I think you've already gotten a sense of how important that is, whether it's our own lived histories or whether it's the histories of the communities we're a part of or the broader culture. So I think about the heartbreak and I think about the pain that I experienced growing up and not being able to have the words to articulate why the pain and the heartbreak I felt so unique because of my Blackness, because of the community in which I'm attached to. And then it was consciousness. And it was Black folks who took it upon themselves to say, look, this isn't an isolated experience that you're having. And so there's a way for you to understand, to see the systemic nature and the kind of cultural implications of what you're going through, and to find some answers on how to insulate and or shift yourself in positions in which you can mitigate some of the heartbreak and pain you're experiencing. The other one, which is kind of on a more practical sense to the work that I do, I spend a lot of my time supporting Black leaders within the context of nonprofit or philanthropic organizations, sometimes in the for-profit sector as well, who have often come into leadership in a time of transition where they were the first Black executive director or the first Black co-executive director of what was otherwise a predominantly white institution for the majority of that organization's history, right? And that is a very unique position for folks to be in. And I think about this in so much as they're trying to redirect their ship, or they are trying to step into their leadership authentically, and oftentimes being met with both invisible doors that are trapdoors, are also just quite honestly very explicit barriers for them to authentically step into their power in an organization that has asked them to lead. And so sometimes that can be really discouraging. And I think many of y'all who are listening will understand exactly the dynamic to which I'm speaking. And sometimes that discouraging sentiment makes us feel like, well, I'm not able to shift this organization, and perhaps this isn't for me. What I am very much so committed to is working with folks who want to see a different possibility, and to connect folks so that they might understand the real breakthroughs that are happening across this country in organizations of all different sizes, across all different sectors, so that the wisdom and the talent and the brilliance that they have isn't lost for organizations that so desperately need it in this moment of time when we're talking about the services, the advocacy, are just the things, the very real material needs that those organizations provide. So I think about this Baldwin quote, in particular, the context of leveraging Black leadership in organizations that perhaps were not situated for it, but need to be. And I think about when Baldwin said, those who say it can't be done are usually interrupted by others doing it. To me, being pro-Black means having a radical enough belief in what is possible to continue through all of the persistent obstacles in the present, that then make it, worthwhile to fight for the future we deserve. So I'll stop at that, and just very much so appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this conversation, and looking forward to, getting into what we get into.
Thank you, the three of you, for your offerings to this space, to this group, for just making time in for this conversation. There's a lot I want to build on, and a lot that I think that a lot of directions we can go on. And I want to, I'm actually going to stay with you, Kat, and then we'll just kind of go where we go. But I was revisiting an article that you wrote, one of the pieces you wrote in this new book, Building a Pro-Black World. And you talk about explicitly, you and your co-author talk about explicitly this notion of one of the failures of DEI work is that it doesn't engage with power. And as I look at that entire book and read the articles and the essays in the book, mine and others, the concept of power is constantly being being surfaced and explored. And so I wanted to maybe start with you, but I'd love to have others react to the question around just what, the particular challenges that may be manifesting in DEI work, and whether it's the absence of an engagement with power or the fact that it gets siloed or whatever it might be. But what is it about power and the distribution of power that can enable the pro-Black institutions and pro-Black sectors to thrive? Why is it that power is the phenomenon that needs to be named and engaged with in order to enable this idea of pro-Blackness to really be animated and brought to life?
Right on.
And I'll start with you, but others can dig into it too.
Yeah. I'll just kind of quickly touch it and then see who wants to jump in. It's interesting you use the word phenomenon, because when I think about power, I think about Bobby Seals as power is the ability to define phenomenon and make it act in the desired manner. And when we think about the Black Panther Party in particular and why they were such a revolutionary organization, is because of the principal commitment to self-determination, which is the ability of a people is to say, we want to see our agency actualized, and to have decision-making and choice in every facet of the way in which we govern ourselves. So when we talk about power in an organizational context, it's really important to think about, Dax, earlier you mentioned the vestiges of slavery. And Trevor, I think you also mentioned this, the vestiges of slavery, Jim Crow, as well as, modern day structural racism, by which we might, we can point to that in various facets of our life. Why is it important to think about the consequence of the vestiges of slavery? Is because every which way you think about the history of this country, Black people have been deprived of their agency, whether it's through environmental factors, whether it's through the wealth disparities that exist. So when we talk about pro-Blackness and power and building power, it's about giving Black folks the ability to have choice and to be self-determined, and how radically profound that would be for everyone else as well. When we think about what's on the other end of coercion, which I think is very much so embedded in our society, it's choice. Those are two opposite ends of the spectrum. And for Black folks in particular to be working toward not only having choice within our community, but having choice when we are integrated into a very multicultural, multiracial society and have that choice respected, I think that becomes the real world that we're trying to forge together. So for me, building power is about giving folks the ability to influence or cause outcomes. And my co-author, Liz Darius, talks about this quite a lot. You cannot talk about revolutionary or liberatory futures without talking about how pivotal power is. Again, the last thing I'll offer here, though, is one thing that has stood with me for I think ever since I read Cyndi's book, The Power Manual, is that there are different ways to think about power. Some of us tend to go to laws. I'm obviously sadistic because I'm in law school as I'm talking to y'all. So I clearly like to think about what Cyndi calls dead forms of power. But I have oftentimes found that the more exciting piece of power is how power is exchanged in interactions, which I give credit where credit is due. Cyndi was the first person to voice that to me in such a way where it kind of latched on. So every single conversation we have, every single moment in which we are spending time with each other in relationship is an opportunity for an exchange for mutual power building. And for Black folks, I think we do that with such both conscious and cognizant, like, mindful ways, but also in ways that it's just in our DNA, in which we have been told we have to survive. And we have to navigate certain systems and navigate certain spaces with a brilliance that sometimes isn't articulated or given credit that it deserves. So I'll stop there and see what my other colleagues have to offer around why building power is so important.
Definitely. Yeah. Trevor. Angela, would love to hear your how you also think about power as a feature of as a way that I think about, and I'm thinking particularly about distribution. I think one of the things that I observe coming up in a lot of the conversations in organizational contexts is about how power is being enacted in across role and across, within hierarchical structures, and a lot of the tensions that people are navigating and naming have to do with how power has been exercised and how people would like power to be exercised. So just how that connects with your work, or wherever the question goes for you.
Yeah, I know that Trevor came off mic too, so I know Trevor has some thoughts about this as well. But Kat alluded to where my mind went about power, which is about the sharing of power that I, sort of mentioned and joked a little bit about, at the beginning. You said, Dax, you said, Angela, you pick whoever you want, right? So you as the moderator aren't exercising the power completely in this space, right? You are sharing and seeding power. And that tiny little example is a model, right? And so as Kat said, we are doing that in ways that are in our core, in our DNA, intentionally and organically. And so in organizations, it's as Trevor said, it's important to love Blackness in all its complexity, right? And so in organizations, talking about power and the sharing of and the seeding of power is infinitely complex. And some people think, well, in order to share power in an organization, it has to be flat, right? Which, so they're models of organizations that try to do that. Not ones that I have seen successfully. But I think more importantly, in what we see, what the research says, what we see in successfully pro-Black organizations is this notion of being intentional about, how decisions are made, how power is held in organizations, formally, right, the formal power, and creating opportunities for people who don't have formal power to still exercise it. So in other words, I am the executive director of the organization, but I don't tell people what to do in ways that, I personally, well, let me put it this way. Personally, I am a collaborative leader. I view myself as a collaborative leader. So it's, being transparent about when I have a decision that needs to be made, and being really transparent about how folks have input, authority, to contribute to that in ways that are constructive in our community. So that means, everything from who we're hiring, that means everything from who's on our board, that means everything from, are our benefits working well. So, our board makes those final decisions, but our staff all contribute to that. So, some tangible examples of how everyone in the organization, and we are a small nonprofit, so that is almost essential, but how everyone in the organization contributes to the important decisions that impact everyone in the organization. So in those, I'd say really concrete ways. And we've, in the complexity of it all, though, I know that Dax and Kat and I and others have had conversations about sort of how that shows up in especially intergenerational ways in organizations that really push us to listen, to be uncomfortable, to really interrogate like what power means. So I had a call with a coaching client yesterday, and we were talking about just the intergenerational ways in which younger generations ask for what they need. I need this in order to feel like I belong in this organization, that this organization engages me and my values. And this client and I are both Gen X. And so the client essentially said, I can't ask for that. People will think I'm selfish. Or I can't ask for that. People will think, whatever. And I said to this client, well, what would it mean for you to actually truly ask for what you need? And then advocate for that. And I think it is, intergenerationally, it is both beautiful to see younger generations be really, really true to what they need in organizations, what's important to them, leading with values. And also those of us in formal authority can, experience that as a real uncomfortable challenge to our power in organizations. So I think we have to be honest about that, be truthful about that, and really grapple with that in our journey toward pro-Blackness. And I don't have all the answers, but I know that it is necessary. I know that I hear on both sides the young leaders who are really pushing, as well as the older leaders that are in more formal positions, like at the bar, who are like, oh, this is rough when these young people are asking me for X, Y, Z, right? So I think sitting in that space of dissonance and discomfort is important to call out, and it's important for us to sit in that space and allow that to propel us forward in this pro-Black journey, in this journey of building organizations that actually work for everyone, and where power is not hoarded, but we grapple with the sort of discomfort that comes with figuring out how to share power in ways that work for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Trevor's got stuff to add. So
I know you got something to
what would you add,
please.
Trevor?
I mean, yeah, I think both of you, honestly hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of my points will just reiterate some of what you said. When I think about DEI initiatives and how and why they've been co-opted, I think a few things come up for me. Surface level diversity. So I think organizations are focused on representation without having a critical analysis of power and deeper and structural issues. I think that is both on the nonprofit and for-profit side. I think tokenism, I think organizations sometimes use the presence of a few marginalized groups to, again, lift up a superficial form of diversity. I think, and this is a big one, I think we live in a very individualistic society, and one that kind of is more geared toward individualism over systemic change. I think capitalism as a structure breeds individualism. So I think even a lot of organizations don't realize, to me, that even if your org is doing DEI well, the sector that you're in probably isn't. And groups don't care about working collaboratively on these issues because working collaboratively, at least in the for-profit space, doesn't necessarily increase profits. And I think related to that is a lack of attention to racial capitalism, just a lack of knowledge and a lack of articulation around racial capitalism, and seeing DEI. And I think there's a lack of seeing DEI work as actually addressing racial capitalism and addressing just the broader economy and creating more cooperative economies. So I think DEI within a for-profit context, to me, is going to be really, really hard to actually, see any like structural change. And I think on the nonprofit side, similarly, there are foundations and philanthropy now that are talking about decolonization, supporting reparations work, but are unwilling to contend with the nonprofit industrial complex. So the question is, can we really create change if we're not also seeking to radically change what our economy looks like? Will we ever really have diversity, equity, and inclusion if we don't radically change the economy in and of itself? And to me, the answer is no. And I think when I think about building pro-Black institutions, I was talking to a colleague and a mentor of mine before this. She was like, well, can you have a pro-Black institution within the nonprofit industrial complex that is majority of the funding is coming from traditional philanthropy? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, I'm an optimist. I would hope so. I would hope that we can build pro-Black institutions, but I do think it's a good question. With in the nonprofit space, if the majority of our funding is coming from institutional philanthropy, or a lot of organizations' funding is coming from institutional philanthropy. What are the tensions there in building pro-Black institutions? And how can we collectively push back against the contours of our current economy so that that DEI work is a collective piece of work, and we're not just all working on it within our own organizations, but collaboratively to see a new society. Again, back to that Robin D.G. Kelly.
I'm going to just dig on this because I think it's just the question in the room that needs to be at least contended with. And I want to come back to this idea of willingness and unwillingness, because I think this idea of the will is really powerful. It's connected to power. But someone might be listening to this right now, and they might be thinking to themselves, all right, is this just a new way to describe an old term? Like, are we just coming up with is this just a matter of semantics? Are we just using pro-Blackness as a proxy for anti-racism or anti-Blackness? So the question becomes, like, what is distinct about this concept that's being, I think, at least hypothesized, brought into the ecosystem, and being now socialized for us to like grapple with it and make meaning out of it? Is it distinct? Is it actually trying to present something that is different than, or building on something that is or is it something that really, or is it merely like another way to talk about work we've just been doing for a really long time? Because I just want to acknowledge, like, just in the space that we're in, I mean, folks have latched onto the idea of anti-racism, or they've latched onto the idea of anti-Blackness. And there's this notion that pro-Blackness potentially is just a spin on that, and therefore doesn't really need to be, you don't need to really adopt this as a way of thinking and being in the world. So how do you contend with that proposition? Don't be polite, y'all. Come on now. We ain't got that much time. Let's go. Jump in. Let's be messy. It's okay.
How do we contend with the proposition of kind of the tension between anti-Blackness and or anti-racism and pro-Blackness?
I think we just to contend is the proposition that someone listening to this might be thinking to themselves, like, this isn't really any different here. Like, we're not actually talking about something new. Like, this is not necessarily a new concept or a new idea. So there's that. And if it is the case that we are talking about something new, what is the difference there? What is the distinction that we're trying to draw in order to move forward?
Yeah, I mean, so I think what I would say to that first part is that in many ways, it isn't really new. It's part of what we're talking about here, pro-Blackness as a framework, as an understanding, is a part of the Black radical tradition. So the early struggles of the 17th century, the abolition movement, Reconstruction, Harlem Renaissance, the Civil Rights Movement, Black Power movement, Pan-Africanism, to today, the movement for Black lives, they are all uplifting like a pro-Black framework, and trying to shift mindsets to to really understand what it means to be pro-Black. So in many ways, what we're talking about isn't new. But I do think, obviously, we are in a new era. 2023, we're having this conversation in 2023, and in 2020, we all witnessed, we were all, most of us, many of us, were locked up inside every day, and many of us weren't. Many of us were, venturing out into society every day and putting our lives at risk. I think, again, going back to the way our economy is structured. But we all, saw a man get murdered, George Floyd get murdered, and had to watch that. I think it was 8 minutes that he had a knee on the back of his neck. So we're having this conversation about pro-Blackness, 3 years after that, where the world saw some of the largest protests against racial injustice, that the world has ever seen, and police brutality that this world has ever seen. And we're also, having this conversation right now, where folks are stepping into a conversation and really and asking questions around decolonization with what we're seeing in Palestine right now. So that context, and the context that we're always in, matters. And so that's what I would say in terms of, is this something new? In many ways it's not, but the current context that we're having is new, and people are stepping into a new consciousness, and it's important to re-uplift. And that's why I think it's so brilliant to have, this brilliance here, because we are uplifting our forefathers and our foremothers. We're quoting bell hooks, we're quoting W.B. Du Bois, James Baldwin. We are showcasing that we are standing on their shoulders in this new context, and asserting that we need pro-Black institutions in this day and age, and trying to articulate what that looks like.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that, Trevor, in so much as, I definitely think pro-Blackness is a part of the larger continuum, and also Black radical tradition. So the continuum of, a movement for freedom that is transcended centuries, right, or extended across centuries. What's important to me, though, about pro-Blackness in 2023 specifically, that I won't go as far as to say it's a novel concept, but I think the way in which we are trying to employ it is that the way in which Blackness is palatable to non-Black folks. There has been a very specific approach to breaking down solidarity amongst Black folks to be accepted in our wholeness. And I think that we have gotten hip to that and said, hey, the jig is up. That is not, when we watch people get murdered simply for no reason other than the color of their skin, no matter what their lived experience was up until that moment, and we are able to stand in solidarity and say that is absolutely wrong. Police sanctioned assassinations on camera, when we have constant information coming at us, the ability to then say pro-Black with all of this information flow, and with all of this constant reminder of what it is in this society that is structurally racist, that is anti-Black. Being pro-Black means in 2023, we are accepting Blackness in every form and facet. So I think about how many Black folks are Black trans leaders in 2023. I think about how many Black folks are Black immigrants in 2023 that are talking about, both American and global issues. I think about folks of all different religious faiths who identify as Black. And so I guess I go as far as to say that how palatable Blackness is in 2023 is tied to a different approach to pro-Blackness, which has a very intersectional analysis. And that feels, I think, very exciting to be a part of the generation that is leading with that openly, daringly, and unapologetically. And if we can continue that, I do think that there will be breakthroughs both for Black folks and everyone else, to your point, Dax, if we are able to continue to lead with that kind of 360 approach to what it means to strive for better outcomes for Black folks in our wholeness, not a certain type of Black folks that got certain degrees and certain letters behind their names, but Black folks across our community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'll just add quickly, because Trevor and Cad also, definitely nailed it. So just to lift up a couple of the things they said, I was thinking about this question in a very simple shift of approach, which is, anti-racism has been about identifying harm or gaps and addressing those. And pro-Blackness is about what is thriving, what is liberation truly, and how do we create the spaces, all the spaces that are necessary to make that possible, to build that as a reality. And that's it's a shift in wording, but it's a radical shift of approach. Right? So not about the gaps, it's about thinking about and harnessing Afrofuturism, which very much isn't new, right? Like African Bambaataa, Nora Hendricks, like folks been dreaming about us going to the stars for generations. And this, the newness of it, as Cad was talking about, is about, I think, a tipping point to how much that has our consciousness, our taking up space, our demand to be authentically ourselves in our own skin, and in our own spaces has reached what feels like a tipping point in this time that we're in, right? This time of both AI and Moms for Liberty and war in Gaza. It's a different, some things are the same, but some things are not. And this political climate that we're in has radically shifted, how much space we are demanding that we're taking up in order to, as I said before, to get what we need as people. So I think that is really critical. And, thinking about the National Black Justice Coalition, that shifts from Black Lives Matter to hashtag All Black Lives Matter, which again is this intersectional analysis that Cad was talking about, and that pushes a conversation which we've been having to its next level. So I think, Dax, it is not new, it is the next frontier on work that on this radical trend, tradition that our ancestors started. And our parents, grandparents, and parents, folks who are living, are moved forward, and it's our job to continue that, to deepen it, and to really push it on so many levels, on the intersectional level, on the global level, on the economic and political level of actual systems change, and radically imagining what these systems can look like in order to make sure that we're all thriving. So I think, you all said it, but for me, it's that, it's that shift from 2020 Black Lives Matter to like all Black Lives Matter. And what does it actually take for that to happen in how we are building these spaces?
I just want to just sort of build, and I see there's a comment in the chat, and I also want to encourage folks who are listening in the webinar, please get your questions in the chat. We've got this next 20 minutes or so to be with you. We want to hear from you, and I know there's at least one or two that are there right now, but just want to make sure that you don't lose the opportunity, and we want to make sure that we bring your voices into this space and are responsive to the things you're bringing in. But the last part of that conversation made me think about what, Angela, you were already lifting up around some of the generational tensions. And part of what I also experience is that there's a license to be that younger folks are bringing into the workplace, which isn't always, that could be messy sometimes, quite frankly. And I think that's okay, though. That's part of the growth, and that's part of the process. And I think we hope and want things to be neat. And a lot of us have been socialized to be neat. A lot of us have that's kind of how we were able to be successful. And it's hard to sort of embrace and acknowledge that was just the journey you had to be on. And if you're still here and in the workspace now, you can actually continue to evolve and grow how you show up as well. So the invitation that I'm hearing around pro-Blackness, in that allness and the wholeness and the full acceptance, is coming from a few different angles and a few different places. And it's not always going to present and show up in very neat ways that we can always feel great about. And so I think the challenge for those of us who feel challenged is not to automatically push it aside, diminish it, reduce it, minimize it, or problematize it if it presents to us and not in a package that doesn't always feel like aligned with how we were socialized and how we came up, because that in and of itself can be that can enable us as Black leaders, as leaders ourselves, to become tools against the very kind of liberation that we're hoping to see. So I wanted to just bring that piece back into the space. And before we pivot to some more of the questions that are coming out from the group, I want to just get to the sort of the brass tacks, to the granularity, to the practicals, to the things that people might be really just hungry for around like tools and the how-tos and the what does it look like. So on a very practical level, when you think about the organizations you either are leading, building, or working with, what does it look and feel like? And I think about this, Cad, in our pre-conversations, you talked about, what does it mean for a board, for an executive director to be in a board meeting and be able to speak in the colloquial term, to be able to speak as themselves, if that's how they want to show up, and that just be fine. That not have to be something they need to feel, worried or concerned about. That's not the only way. That's a very particularly, perhaps even superficial description of what we might mean, but maybe it's not. Maybe actually bringing that into the space is what the space needs. But the question that I want to have you all grapple with a bit is this: what does that look like? What does it feel like? What are some of the things one might see as indicators? If we talk about KPIs, like what are some of the indicators of a pro-Black space or a healthy pro-Black institutional space? And what are some of the practices or behaviors that you might expect to see in that kind of an environment where pro-Blackness is being practiced in a real and meaningful way? So it's practices, behaviors, indicators, sightseeings. This is a chance to sort of bring it to life for people in a way that they can start to either measure for themselves what's going on or not going on, or begin to create a bit of a, their own like list of things that maybe begin to start to think about measuring.
Yeah, I'll start. There's some work happening somewhere in my space, so there may be a little background noise, so apologies. But I'll jump in. One thing. So our friends of the National Equity Project a lot of times talk about measuring outcomes. To your point, Cad, to your point, Dax, rather, in experiential and in rational. So thinking about like answering your question through both the rational outcomes that we want to see and like the more traditional KPIs, and the experiential, and there's inextricably linked. So I think about the rational outcomes as like, what does the leadership in your the formal leadership in your organization look like? Are there Black people at the top in all levels, on the board, in the executive level? Are people staying in your organization? Well, are your hiring practices bringing in the folks who reflect the populations that you're serving? Are people staying in your organization, right? Like, what's the retention look like? What are the benefits of your organization? Do you pay for healthcare? Do you have flexible leave? Thinking about the things that Black people need in your in the world to thrive, and that they are not getting unfortunately, in so many organizations. So leading with that, asking the Black people in your organization or in your communities, what do you need in order to be able to show up authentically in your full humanity? And then where are we where are we right now? And how do we get from here to there? So how do you start, I think, asking those questions? What does it look like? Those kinds of things that I said, that rationally, the retention, the hiring practices, the benefits, the who's in the organization at all levels, especially in the leadership, the formal leadership. And there is a whole host of experiential that is critical as well, and that we've named a lot in this conversation, right? So pro-Black organizations lead with love, and that's actually something that every single one of us talked about. I talked about it, then Trevor and Kat talked about it, then Trevor talked about it. Loving Black people, but leading with love. And Toni Morrison said, "Love is or it ain't. Then love ain't none. Letting love at all." So loving through the complexity of our people, but loving deeply, which it will allow us and allow organizations to push through the discomfort and the challenges. So leading with love, centering head and heart and spirit in your work and naming those things. leading with community, right? So so the experience of your organization feeling like a community where people want to come and be themselves and be their authentic selves. Those are all, I think, indicators of pro-Blackness. And also, leading with impact, right? Like, we're not just showing up. There's a lot of work for us to do. Are we actually making a difference in the lives of the people in your organization and the communities that you're serving, but defining that in ways that mean something for Black people, and not just are defined by philanthropy, are not just defined by capitalist society, are defined by what means something to the Black people who are showing up. Who you say you're showing up for. So that experiential is foundational, and then there are plenty of ways to measure that in a rational way. Just a quick story. When I first got hired, I think I'd signed my offer letter, and I showed up to a meeting that one of our volunteer committees was having. And so everyone jumps on the Zoom or the Teams or whatever it was, and it was like for about 3, 4, 5 minutes. And then my board chair says, "All right, Black people, let's focus." And I think that's the first time in my professional life where someone has said that in a meeting, like a work meeting, not the ERG, not the Black people, the affinity group, like everybody. And not everybody on that call was Black, but it was about talking to the folks who were in the room, who were the center of that conversation, because we were planning something for Black folks, and mostly Black folks were planning that. And it was not about like, all right, I'm just gonna talk to the Black people now, or sorry, white folks, don't feel bad when I say this, but it was just like, this is where we are. This is who we are. Everybody in the room knows it. Let's keep moving. And it, for me, was an affirmation, like, oh, let me make sure I sign that offer letter, because I really, this is an organization that I want to be in and that I want to lead. And I tell that story a lot when folks ask about, why I came to this organization and why I stay. And so that for me is a tangible example of that question that you were asking. And I think a lot of what Cad was talking about Black folks showing up unapologetically, authentically, as just as a part of the fabric of the organization. I think that is critical, and that is essentially essentially and unapologetically pro-Black.
I think for me, I think the first thing, and I thought that was a brilliant answer. I think for me, the first thing that comes up is not only, one of the things to measure is not only, the diversity or the number of Black people that you have within your organization up and down. I do think that is, something that should and could be looked at and tracked, but being accountable. So not only being accountable to Black people from a numbers perspective, or what I would say kind of a surface level perspective, but being accountable to a Black ethos, and tracking that will be more qualitative than quantitative. Loving Blackness is more of an art than a science. And so that will be, to me, really understanding and creating a space for Black people, and then by extension, everybody else, to come into a welcoming and loving space. What do we mean when we say, oh, they invited to the cookout, or so-and-so is invited to the cookout? Well, what does the cookout feel like? The cookout feels like a welcoming space where we are kikiing, we are making jokes, we're having good food, we are celebrating and loving on one another for our brilliance. And so, I don't think organizations need to feel familial. At the end of the day, we are coming together to align around a mission. We are aligning around work. And I do think that it's important to have that bit of a separation. But to me, what it should feel like is more joyous. We should try to imbue more joy into our work. And I think a part of Blackness, when you look at the history of Black people in the United States, that's been a core part of that. So not only Black people from a numbers perspective, from a diversity perspective, but being accountable to a Black ethos. And that would mean, a part of that would mean deconstructing what we currently understand as professionalism. Right. To me, I wear a hat. I was thinking about wearing a hat today. I wear a hat every day in the workplace. And some might say that that's not professional. But to me, a part of that, a part of decolonization, a part of loving Blackness and viewing pro-Blackness into our organizations is reshaping what we currently see as normal, because what we currently see as normal fits into a white lens, a white norm. So decentering whiteness, I think, would also be a part of that. And I think that there are ways to track that qualitatively. And then just the other things that I'll name is, using your voice. I do think that, I'm a comms person. I do think that even if your organization isn't necessarily focused on or committed to an issue or to the Black community, I think that that's okay. But you can still use your voice to support Black issues, particularly in your community, wherever you are rooted. I'm here in New York. There are a ton of things to comment on as it relates to the Black community, every day, 365 days a year. And so I don't think only in times of crisis, when a Black man is, a video of a Black man has gone viral, is the only time that you should weigh in on Black issues. So I do think using your voice is another thing that we can see more from more and more organizations throughout the year. And, a part of using your voice, I think responsibly, would be having the cultural competence. So it would be beneficial to have Black people at the table to weigh in when you do want to use your organizational voice. And we should see more of that. And organizations shouldn't be afraid to talk about issues that affect Black communities, and then by extension affect us as a society. And then the last two things that I'll touch on is that organizations should use their dollars. And this is a little bit more on the for-profit side than on the nonprofit side, because nonprofits, particularly Black-led nonprofits, are struggling to get multi-year funding. But on the for-profit side, one, I'd just like to see more collaboration, more cooperatives, but I'd like to see more things done with profits that are supporting Black communities, and not in ways that seek to regain money or regain profits. So we saw a lot of corporations support kind of the justice movements or support Black communities in 2020. But a lot of what we saw was made in investments. So they're trying to recoup money, or they're trying to profit. I would love to see more grants. I would love to see more unrestricted dollars go to organizations that are both businesses or nonprofits. Businesses can get grants too. So I'd love to see organizations use their dollars in a more transformative way. And then just last touched on is philanthropy. Most Black, to create a sector, to create organizations that are pro-Black or that are loving of Black people, these organizations need to be funded and led, to me, by Black people. And when you look at the funding, particularly on the nonprofit side within philanthropy, the organizations that are Black-led are usually at the bottom as it relates to receiving funding. And then the organizations that are focused on racial justice get even less. So philanthropy has to step up and really unlock some of the dollars that they're sitting on. You got folks that are sitting on billions and billions and billions of dollars of endowments. And I'm not trying to get into the spend down or exist in perpetuity conversation, but you can spend more. You can spend more. I know that.
Thank you. It's so true.
Yeah, I want to see if we want to get to any questions, so I'll try and practice some brevity. But the two things, plus 1,000 to both what Trevor and Angela said, I think there's so many critical insights in there, and now have the wheels spinning myself and thinking about all of what y'all have shared. One thing that I will offer is that, in particular, if your organization is making, in brass tacks, is making a commitment to being pro-Black, but you're not doing some type of community listening to your Black audiences, whether you are a service-based organization or advocacy org, I'm pretty sure there's going to be some Black folks that come into interaction with your organization. If you are not distinctly and uniquely creating space to be held to account about what it is you're doing with those Black folks in mind, then there's something you need to shift. So if you work in prison reform and you're not listening primarily to what it's like to be a Black incarcerated person, maybe you need to rethink through how you're evaluating your programs. If you work in education and you're not holding space for Black mamas and Black fathers and Black kids within the context of the educational services you support, you cannot be saying that you are purporting to commit to pro-Blackness. If you are not taking the time to figure out the mechanisms in which you understand, to Angela's point, that kind of experiential reflection from your external Black folks, I think there is a very particular tendency to want to say we can invite in certain Black folks and we can listen to them, but folks that we don't have as much forms of recourse when they say something we don't like, then if we're not willing to listen to them, I think it's very hard to be able to, in integrity, say you're committed to pro-Blackness. Lastly, you should be able to juxtapose your strategic commitments to before you were an organization saying you wanted to be pro-Black to after you made that commitment. So to Trevor's point, if you're not speaking up on Black issues, but also don't have a consistent desire to be involved in either working in coalitions or partnerships with Black-led organizations or Black-led networks, then you're missing an opportunity. And so for me, I think that really is one of the pieces, those two areas. What are the strategic differences? Once you say you make this commitment, who are you working with and who are you in relationship with now that you weren't in relationship with before? And who are you listening to and how are you listening to them that centers and also recognizes the unique perspective that they have to offer?
So I'm so sorry to bring this at the end of the conversation or towards the tail end of the conversation, but I think we've already touched upon it and it's sort of been at the edges of this conversation, but I can talk about it euphemistically or more directly, but we're living in a very challenging moment. And in many ways, it feels as though the agenda around sort of justice, racial justice that we, and all of us, I think, were animated by, fueled by, have been very much deeply tied to, has sort of receded from or and does not sit in the same space it might have for the last couple of years. And our lives, we know different, and our work, we know different, because all of us are hunkered down doing it, and we're very clear that it's still moving forward. But I think nevertheless, the question remains, like, if we could think about this, the idea of pro-Blackness having possibilities for all conversations or for many conversations that we're struggling with, or the issues or challenges that we're faced with as a country. I think the question I would like to maybe close us with is, if you could talk about like the moment in very sort of succinct ways we're in, and how you see pro-Blackness responding or giving us tools to engage with this moment. So what is this moment? And how is pro-Blackness helping us or providing us with some tools that can help us engage with it? And I think I've heard us talk about it, like looking back at our history, seeing some of our forms of communalism and communitarianism, but I'd just be interested in how you all are thinking about it in your own work, or maybe seeing others in your lives respond to the moment using what you would articulate or view as pro-Black tools and strategies. I like just leaving it open to you, because y'all are so polite. Y'all are just very kind, space sharing people. We got 3 minutes, y'all. Somebody needs to say it. So,
all right, I'll jump in very briefly.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Brevity is a leadership skill, and I was thinking about this earlier. So June Jordan says, to tell the truth is to become beautiful, to begin to love yourself, value yourself, and that's political in its most profound way. And I think this moment calls for telling the truth in the most authentic, powerful way and risky way, that we can. That to me is one of the approaches that I think is fundamentally pro-Black, to be authentic about what we need in order to thrive and and demanding it. So telling the truth is political, is pro-Black in this moment.
Love it. Thank you.
I mean, I think we need, I think, organize, I think is the answer to everything. The organizers answer to everything is organize. And I do think at the end of the day, we need to organize. And for me, through my work, a key part of that is helping folks articulate and step into and identify narrative and cultural strategies. So to me, narrative and shifting narratives and shifting cultures should be a larger part of our work across progressive social movement. To get a culture that we need to shift is one from an anti-Black culture to a pro-Black culture. So to me, no matter kind of where you sit across the progressive space, if you start to name cultural strategy as part of your work, to me, a big part of that would be shifting from an anti-Black culture to a pro-Black culture. And then, of course, the work that we do at Bliss, we're focused on Black people, but we're also focused on Indigenous people as well. And so how do we shift from a culture that has been rooted and grown out of the seeds of colonialism to one that is radically transformed and liberated and decolonized. And the last thing I'll say, I think there's a question in the chat about a pro-Black economy. I can't go into it, but I think there's been a lot of things that have been written about as it relates to restorative economics or economic democracy. I think often we get into this binary of like capitalism and communism, and I don't think we necessarily need to, or I think we can have a more nuanced conversation. I think frameworks like restorative economics and economic democracy give us some language to think about, well, what does community wealth look like? What does a society look like where there are more mom and pop shops, there are more cooperatives, where we are controlling the way resources are disseminated and in our own local economies. So that's what I'll say on that.
Bring it to Kat, and then we'll turn it over to Diane to close us out.
Right on. I will keep it short. I think about Adrienne Marie Brown's work, pleasure activism and the politics of feeling good. I think that Black folks have, even when entrenched in a world that has been content on breaking them down, found ways to be joyous. And I think Angela mentioned this earlier, and to find tremendous hope. And I think that is a pro-Black position to have. Like, so even with what feels like the weight of the world on your shoulders, still being able to engage in deep belly laughter. I think about the most fun that I've ever had, whether organizing, whether it's in law school, whether it's in any space that I've been in, it's been where, particularly whether it's multiracial or not, I've been able to be in camaraderie with other Black folks and been able to have a hopeful outlook on what it was we were there to do, to be joyful about the fact that we even made it to where we're at. And to be able to laugh at some of the absurdity of this world while also laughing at the fact that we are getting through it. And so for me, that ability to, if you think about, it's the last thing I'll say, like a lot of our cultural biggest influences, they can be tied to the Black experience. We just don't give Black folks the credit they deserve. Some of the funniest shit that, excuse my language, that the 48 participants on here that y'all ever have come across probably came from somebody Black. So I would say, think about what it means to be, in laughter with one another, and what levity does for us in a world that's content on bringing us down. That to me is absolutely tied to a pro-Black position. And Diana, I'll pass it to you.
Mm-hmm. Diana, can I say one thing before you close this? I know we're over, but I just want to offer, like, the things you all just shared have inspired me, and I think Angela in particular, what you said about truth telling, I would offer just as a companion to that protection. As our folks are out there telling the truth, then I think part of what it means to be pro-Black is to protect people, is to give them cover, is to not turn your back on them, is to stand up for them, even if it's in quiet ways. So I just want to encourage it in this moment, whatever this moment might mean for you, that if you have people out there and they're out there standing their ground, making their peace, saying what they need to say, protect them, love them, and give them cover too. And that's pro-Black. So thank you.
Thank you, Dax. It's a really powerful conversation, y'all. So we're just going to close out and let you know we are recording this conversation, and we will post it on our LinkedIn page. We will also email the folks. If you were one of the 30 people, I'll put it in gallery view so everybody can see everybody. If you were one of the 30 people who logged in first, we will pull the registration report after this event, and you'll get an email just asking for your home address so we can mail the book to you. Give us a couple weeks to get them out. But we're excited that you'll be like engage in doing this work. Good Shepherds oftentimes does create practical implementation tools. To Michelle's point, we have an Anti-Racism and Equity Institute that we're getting ready to relaunch. And so we'll also include you on a list. So that way we can just share those resources with folks. We don't believe in hoarding resources. We believe in sharing it with the world. So that way it can benefit everyone. So thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And for those folks who had those 2 questions in the chat, we will share them with the panelists and try to get you some follow-up resources as well, because again, it's important to have resources to execute on the work. Thanks, y'all, and have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank y'all.
Bye.
Peace.